What if a single kiss could unravel the very fabric of your reality? The rain wasn't falling so much as it was being thrown a horizontal, wind-whipped assault against the window panes of the old city library. Inside the world was a capsule of hushed silence and the smell of aging paper. Leo preferred it this way. The ordered quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of his own mind. He was a restorer, a man who mended broken spines and torn pages, a fixer of things that others had deemed too damaged to save. He was working late, the single lamp on his desk casting a warm, solitary pool of light that pushed the vast, shadowy expanse of the fiction section into near darkness. That's when he saw her. She was a splash of incongruous color in the monochrome stillness, a woman in a deep emerald dress, looking utterly lost. She stood between the towering shelves, her fingers not touching the books, but hovering near them as if sensing their energy. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was damp at the ends. She had no coat. Who comes to a library in a storm, dressed for a gala, without a coat? Their eyes met across the silent aisle. It wasn't a shy glance or a curious look, it was a collision. In her gaze, Leo saw a tempest that rivaled the one outside, a swirling mix of fear, desperation, and something else, something ancient and profoundly sad. He felt an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force that drew him up from his chair and toward her without a single conscious thought. He was a man who planned, who considered, who restored. He did not impulsively approach beautiful, crying strangers in the dark, but he did. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that was swallowed by the silence. She didn't answer with words, she just looked at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face as if reading a story she already knew the ending to. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. And then, she stepped forward, closed the distance between them, and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, it was not a question, it was a statement, a surrender, a desperate act. Her lips were cold, but the kiss itself was electric, a jolt that bypassed his skin and went straight to his core. It tasted of rain and salt and something metallic, like the air after a lightning strike. For a heartbeat, Leo was frozen, a statue in his own life. Then, instinct took over. His hands came up to her arms, not to push her away, but to steady her, to steady himself. He kissed her back. The world, the storm, the endless rows of books, it all dissolved into a silent, roaring static. And just as suddenly as it began, it was over. She pulled away, her breath catching in a ragged sob. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto his. "It was a mistake," she whispered, the words a ghost in the air between them. A terrible, terrible mistake. Before he could form a single syllable, before his brain could even process the meaning of her words, she turned and fled. Her footsteps were silent on the thick carpet, a phantom retreating into the deeper shadows. He stood there, rooted to the spot, the phantom pressure of her lips still burning on his, the taste of her still on his tongue. The only proof she had ever existed was the faint, floral scent she left in her wake and the profound, aching emptiness her departure carved into the space around him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock the only sound, and replayed the moment in an endless, torturous loop. The look in her eyes, the cold touch of her skin, the devastating finality of her words, a mistake. The word echoed in the hollow of his chest. He was a mistake. A wrong turn, a spilled coffee, a missed bussy was an error in her calculation. The thought was a physical pain, but then he remembered the kiss itself, the raw, unvarnished emotion in it. That was not nothing, that was everything. A mistake doesn't feel like a beginning and an end fused into one catastrophic, beautiful moment. A mistake doesn't rewire your nervous system. He was a restorer. He saw the value in broken things, and she, whoever she was the most beautifully broken thing he had ever encountered. The next day, he was back at the library as it opened, a man possessed. He questioned the stern-faced head librarian, Mrs. Gable. Had she seen a woman in a green dress last night? Mrs. Gable had not. He checked the security camera logs at the front desk, inventing a story about a lost heirloom bracelet. The grainy black and white footage showed the main entrance. He fast-forwarded to the time of the storm. People came in, people went out. He never saw her enter. He never saw her leave. It was as if she had simply materialized between the shelves and then vanished back into the ether. This impossibility, instead of deterring him, only fueled his obsession. She had been real. He could still taste her. He spent his days off walking the city, his eyes scanning the crowds for a glimpse of honey-colored hair, for a flash of emerald green. He started to notice the small things he'd missed before. A man in an impeccably tailored old-fashioned suit, standing too still on a street corner, checking a pocket watch that didn't tick. A faint shimmering distortion in the air near the old city clock tower, like heat haze on a cold day. The city itself began to feel like a facade, a painted backdrop hiding a deeper, more intricate machinery. A week after the kiss he found it. Tucked into the pages of a book he was restoring, a first edition of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, was a small, rectangular card. It wasn't paper. It was a strange, metallic laminate, cool to the touch and unnaturally smooth. On it, etched in a minimalist, elegant font, were 3 words: the Chronos Club. Below that, an address he'd never heard of, on a street that his well-worn city map claimed was a pedestrian alleyway behind a bakery. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was her. It had to be a clue, a breadcrumb left behind, either by accident or by design. That night, with the card burning a hole in his pocket, he went to the address. It wasn't an alleyway. It was a narrow, unmarked door of dark, weathered oak, nestled between two brick buildings. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a single, seamless piece of ancient wood. He raised his hand, his knuckles hovering an inch from the surface. This was the threshold. Behind this door lay answers. Who was she? Why did she kiss him? Why did she call it a mistake? And what was the Chronos Club? He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air cold in his lungs. He was about to knock, to step into a world he could not possibly understand, when the door swung inward on silent, unseen hinges. The light from within was not electric. It was a soft, golden, pulsating glow. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the impossible light, was the man in the old-fashioned suit. His eyes, ancient and knowing, settled on Leo. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. She should not have touched you, the man said, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. The kiss was a temporal anomaly, a rupture. It is unfortunate. Leo stared, his mind reeling. Temporal anomaly, rupture. The words meant nothing and everything. He thought of her desperate eyes, the taste of lightning, the way she vanished from the cameras. A cold, terrifying understanding began to dawn in the deepest part of his mind. The man stepped aside, a clear, grim invitation. You had better come in, Mr. Alder. It seems you are now part of the equation. Leo stood on the precipice, the familiar world of rain and libraries and mended books at his back. Ahead lay the golden, pulsating unknown. He thought of her, of the devastating, world-altering mistake of their kiss. He didn't care about anomalies or ruptures. He only knew one thing with a certainty that shook his very soul. He would tear the fabric of reality itself to find her, and to make that single, perfect mistake last forever. He took a step forward, across the threshold, and into the light. The air inside the Chronos Club was thick and still, tasting of ozone and old parchment. It was not a club in any sense Leo understood. There were no chairs, no tables, no murmur of conversation. Instead, the vast, circular chamber was dominated by a complex, three-dimensional orrery suspended from the domed ceiling, a constellation of interlocking brass rings and glowing orbs that moved with a silent, inexorable grace. The walls were not walls, but vast tapestries woven from what looked like shimmering light, depicting scenes that shifted and bled into one another. Roman legions marching past skyscrapers, dinosaurs grazing in misty fields beside medieval castles. It was a map of everything that ever was, all at once. The man in the suit, who had introduced himself only as Alistair, led him across the silent floor. His footsteps made no sound. You feel it, don't you? Alistair said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying perfectly in the profound quiet. The weight of it. The pressure of all those stacked moments. Leo could only nod, his senses overwhelmed. He felt dizzy, unmoored. He was a man who fixed things, who worked with tangible, physical history. This was history as a living, breathing, chaotic entity. She is an archivist, Alistair continued, stopping before one of the luminous tapestries. This one showed a storm-lashed city that Leo recognized as his own, but from a century ago. Her name is Alara. It is her duty to observe, to record. She is a witness. She is not meant to be a participant. Where is she? Leo's voice was rough, alien in this place. Contained, Alistair replied, a flicker of what might have been pity in his ancient eyes. The kiss was not merely a breach of protocol, Mr. Alder. It was a cataclysm. When an archivist forms a tangible connection with a fixed-point individual, a person like you, rooted firmly in your own timeline, it creates a paradox, a crack, and cracks have a tendency to spread. He gestured to the tapestry. The image of the old city shimmered, and for a terrifying second, Leo saw a ghostly double-exposed image of the modern library superimposed over the historic scene, both structures occupying the same space in a dizzying, impossible overlap. It lasted only a heartbeat before snapping back. You see, your timeline and hers, for a single moment, became entangled. The kiss created a resonance. A feedback loop of what if that is destabilizing the local chronology. Her mistake is now a structural flaw in the fabric of this city's history. Leo's mind rebelled. It was too vast, too abstract. He thought of her desperate eyes in the library. She was scared, he said, clinging to the one human truth he understood. She wasn't trying to break your rules. She was, lost. Alistair sighed, a sound of infinite weariness. She was on a standard observational mission to your early 21st century. But she encountered a temporal rogue, a dissident from our own future who seeks to unravel history for his own ends. He attacked her not with weapons, but with a temporal dissonance wave. It disorients, scatters one's consciousness across multiple potential timelines. In her confusion, she anchored herself to the first stable, kind presence she felt, yours. The explanation landed like a physical blow. Her kiss wasn't about him. It wasn't some profound, fated connection. It was a reflex, a drowning woman grabbing the nearest solid object. He was a human life raft. The beautiful, world-shattering moment he had been clinging to, the memory that had fueled his obsession, was reduced to a symptom of her disorientation. The humiliation was a cold wash, followed immediately by a sharper, more protective ache. She had been attacked. She had been in terror. "Let me see her," Leo demanded, his voice stronger now. "That is not possible. I need to see her." He was a restorer. He mended broken things, and Alara, an archivist of time itself, was the most broken thing he had ever encountered. Alistair studied him for a long, silent moment, his gaze seeming to weigh the very substance of Leo's soul. To see her is to risk further entanglement. The paradox could deepen. "I don't care." The words were out before he could consider them, and he knew with every fiber of his being that they were true. The mystery had become a mission. The obsession had become a vow. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Alistair's lips. "I believe you," he said softly. "That is the only reason you are still here." He turned and led Leo to a section of the wall that appeared solid, but parted at his approach like water, revealing a corridor of pure, soft light. At the end of the corridor was a room that was not a room, but a sphere of suspended animation. And within it, floating in a state of serene stasis, was Alara. She wore a simple, gray shift now, her honey-colored hair floating around her head like a halo. She was ethereal, untouchable, a captured star. But even in her slumber, the echo of that desperate sadness was etched on her face. Leo pressed his hand against the transparent surface of the sphere. It was cool and vibrated with a low, deep hum. "Can she hear me?" "No," Alistair said. "She exists outside the stream of time now. It is the only way to quarantine the paradox." "Then how do we fix it?" Leo asked, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "How do we ... mend her?" Alistair's expression was grim. "There is only one way. The resonance must be neutralized. The connection between you must be severed completely and irrevocably." The finality of the word struck Leo with the force of a physical blow. Severed. It meant forgetting. It meant her becoming a ghost in his own history, a vague, unremembered dream. It meant the most profound moment of his life being surgically removed, leaving behind only a hollow, inexplicable ache. "And if I refuse, then the crack will widen," Alistair said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "The overlaps will become more frequent, more severe. This city, your reality, will begin to literally unravel. Buildings from different eras will phase in and out of existence. People will be lost, their timelines scrambled. The chaos will be absolute, all because of a single, desperate kiss." The weight of the responsibility was crushing. It was his city, his world, balanced against the memory of a woman he never really knew. It was an impossible choice, presented as no choice at all. He looked at Alara suspended in her timeless prison, a consequence of a mistake that was now his to resolve. He had come here seeking answers, seeking her. He had found a burden he was never meant to carry. The restorer in him wanted to fix this, to put everything back in its rightful place. But the man, the one who had felt the shocking, electric truth of her lips, recoiled at the price. Alistair placed a hand on his shoulder. "The process is simple. You will enter the resonance chamber. It will isolate the temporal signature of the paradox, the unique energy of your connection, and safely dissipate it. For you it will be like waking from a dream, a faint, lingering emotion with no memory to attach it to." Leo stared at Alara's face, committing every detail to a memory he knew was doomed. He thought of the storm, the library, the taste of rain and lightning. He thought of her whisper, a terrible, terrible mistake. And in that moment, surrounded by the silent, terrifying machinery of eternity, Leo Alder made his choice. He would not forget. He could not. To forget her would be to erase the most real thing that had ever happened to him. He would find another way. A restorer didn't destroy the damaged part. He found a way to integrate the break, to make the whole stronger for having been broken. He met Alistair's gaze, his own eyes now reflecting a storm of a different kind. "Take me to the resonance chamber," he said, the lie feeling like acid on his tongue. He would play their game. He would walk into their machine, but he would not let them take her from him. He would find a way to turn their mistake into a forever, even if it meant unraveling time itself. The resonance chamber was not a room of light, but of absence. It was a perfect, soundless cube of what looked like obsidian, but it felt less like a material and more like a hole cut out of the universe. Stepping inside was like stepping out of his own skin. The air was thin, void of scent or temperature, and the only thing he could hear was the frantic, betraying drum of his own heart. Alistair remained outside the seamless threshold, his figure already seeming distant, a painting viewed through a dark lens. "The process will be painless," Mr. Aldo simply breathed. "The chamber will do the rest. When you wake, the instability will be corrected." The door, a section of the black wall, sealed itself without a sound, plunging Leo into a darkness so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against his eyes. He was alone with the memory he was supposed to surrender. He closed his eyes, not to block out the nothingness, but to find her within it. He didn't summon the kiss itself, but the moment just before, the look in her eyes, that tempest of fear and desperation. Alistair had called it disorientation, the result of an attack, but as Leo replayed it, stripping away his own romantic projections, he saw something else nestled within the terror. A flicker of recognition, as if in that chaotic storm of her consciousness, she hadn't just found a random anchor, she had found him. A low hum began to vibrate through the soles of his feet, a frequency that seemed to resonate with his very bones. It was a pulling sensation, a gentle but insistent tugging at the edges of his mind, as if tiny invisible hooks were being set into the fabric of his most recent memories. He felt a dizzying lurch, and suddenly he wasn't in the darkness anymore. He was in the library. The rain was lashing the windows. He saw himself at his desk, the pool of lamplight illuminating his hands as he carefully glued a torn page, and then he saw her, emerging from the shadows. But this time, he wasn't just watching the memory. He was feeling it from the outside and the inside simultaneously. He felt the dull ache of his own lower back from hunching over the book, the dry, papery taste of the air. And at the same time, he felt a terrifying, vertiginous disorientation, a sensation of being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. He felt a scream building that had no air to give it voice. This was her memory, bleeding into his. The chamber wasn't just erasing the paradox. It was playing it back, dissecting it. The scene shifted, fractured. He saw the library from a dozen different angles at once, from high in the shadows of the shelves. From the perspective of the security camera he knew hadn't captured her, from a point of view that was simultaneously inside and outside the building. This was the temporal dissonance wave Alistair had described. It was like being in a house of mirrors during an earthquake. And through the chaos, a single, stable point emerged. Him, Leo, at his desk. In the maelstrom of her shattered perception, he was a fixed point, a still, calm center in the raging storm. The pulling sensation in the chamber intensified, trying to pry this core memory loose, to dissolve the connection. He gritted his teeth, clinging to the vision, to the feeling of being that anchor. Then, a new sensation, a sharp, psychic pain, like a needle driven into his mind's eye. It was a memory, but not his, and not one he had seen before. It was clearer, sharper, and utterly calm. It was Illyra's memory, but from a time before the storm. He saw her, not in a grey shift, but in her emerald dress, standing in the very same Chronos Club chamber. She was speaking with Alistair, her posture rigid, her face a mask of fierce determination. It has to be him, Alistair. Her voice echoed in Leo's mind, clear as crystal. The rogue is targeting fixed points, creating cascading failures. Leo Older is a nexus. His life, his work. He restores things that were meant to be lost. The rogue will target him next. I have to get to him first. I have to create a connection strong enough to shield him, to tether him to our timeline before the rogue can sever him from his own. Alistair's response was a sorrowful rumble. To create such a tether is forbidden, Illyra. It will be seen as a paradox. The council will brand it a mistake. Her voice broke, but her resolve did not. Then let them. It's a mistake I have to make. It's the only way to save him. The memory shattered. Leo gasped, stumbling in the absolute blackness of the chamber. The pulling sensation suddenly feeling like a violent assault. The truth was a lightning strike, illuminating the entire landscape of the lie. The kiss wasn't a mistake born of confusion. It was a deliberate act, a shield, a rescue mission. She hadn't been a lost soul clinging to him. She had been a soldier throwing herself in front of a bullet meant for him. Alistair hadn't been trying to contain a paradox. He was trying to erase the evidence of her defiance, to undo the very thing that was protecting him. The hum in the chamber rose to a deafening roar. The hooks in his mind dug deeper, and he could feel the memory of the kiss beginning to fray at the edges. The image of her face starting to blur and pixelate. They were winning. They were going to take her from him, and in doing so, they would leave him utterly vulnerable to this rogue he knew nothing about. A raw, primal scream tore from his throat, a sound of pure, defiant refusal. He was a restorer. He did not break things. He did not let precious, beautiful things be destroyed. He focused every ounce of his will, not on fighting the chamber, but on the memory itself. He didn't just remember the kiss. He fell into it. He let the taste of rain and lightning flood his senses, let the cold of her skin burn him, let the devastating, world-ending truth of her sacrifice fill him completely. He wrapped the memory around himself like a suit of armor, a shield she had given him, and the chamber cracked. It wasn't a physical sound, but a shattering sensation in the air itself. The oppressive blackness flickered, and for a single, breathtaking second, he saw it, the complex, glowing web of the paradox. It wasn't a floor, it was a bridge, a single, shimmering thread of golden light, stretching from his heart through the impenetrable walls of the chamber, arcing out into the impossible geometry of the Chronos Club and connecting directly to the stasis sphere where Illyra slept. It was real. Their connection was a tangible, beautiful and powerful thing. Then, the chamber door hissed open. Alistair stood there, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The hum had ceased. The pulling was gone. Leo stood, his chest heaving, the memory of Illyra's kiss not faded, but burning brighter than ever in his mind, now layered with the devastating truth of her sacrifice. He looked at Alistair, his eyes no longer those of a confused restorer, but of a man who had seen the blueprint of his own destiny and refused to let it be edited. It wasn't a mistake, Leo said, his voice quiet but ringing with absolute certainty in the silent chamber. It was a choice, and I'm not letting you erase it. Alistair took a step back, genuine fear in his ancient eyes for the first time. The chamber hadn't just failed, The subject had resisted, and in resisting he had seen the truth. The carefully maintained narrative had collapsed. The paradox wasn't contained. It was awake, and it was walking out of the chamber, its eyes fixed on the man who had tried to destroy it. The rescue mission was over. The war had just begun. The silence in the wake of the resonance chamber's failure was more deafening than any roar. It was a fragile, crystalline thing, and Leo's words hung in it, shattering the last pretense of cooperation. Alistair did not move to stop him as he stepped out of the oppressive black cube. The Restorer and the Timekeeper stood facing each other in the pulsating golden light of the main chamber, the air crackling with a new, dangerous energy. "You do not understand the forces you are playing with," Alistair said, his voice low, stripped of its former paternalistic calm. It was now the tone of a strategist whose primary piece had just moved against him. Alara acted on a theory, a gambit. She saw a potential future where the rogue unmade you, and in doing so, created a fault line that collapsed a century of history. She sought to prevent that by tying your fate to hers. "You called it a mistake," Leo countered, his gaze unwavering, his body still thrumming with the aftershock of preserving his own memories. "You lied to me. I presented a necessary truth." Alistair's composure finally fractured, a spiderweb of desperation showing through. To the Council, any unauthorized entanglement is a mistake, a cancer. Her method, however noble her intent, has created the very instability she sought to prevent. The rogue is drawn to paradoxes, Mr. Alder. They are flares in the time stream. By marking you, she has made you his primary target. The only way to save you, to save this entire temporal sector, was to sever the tether and make you invisible again. Leo's mind raced, connecting the horrifying dots, the man in the old-fashioned suit, the shimmering distortions in the city. They weren't just side effects, they were symptoms of a hunt. He was the prey, and Alara's protection was the beacon leading the predator right to him. "Where is this rogue?" Leo demanded, taking a step forward. The vast orrery above them seemed to spin faster, the brass rings worry with a rising urgency. "He is here now." The overlaps you witnessed were not just the result of the kiss. They were his footsteps, his attempts to pinpoint your location. He exists slightly out of phase, a ghost in the machine, and Alara's tether on you is the only thing keeping him from fully manifesting in your present. He cannot strike until he can fully synchronize. A cold dread, colder than the void of the resonance chamber, seeped into Leo's veins. He was a fixed point, but he was also bait. Alara's sacrifice had created a deadly stalemate. So what happens now? We wait for him to find a way through. The Council's decision was final, Alistair said, his shoulders slumping with a weight that seemed to span eons. The tether must be broken. Since the chamber failed, there is only one other way. He looked toward the sphere where Alara was contained. We sever it from her end. A total memory wipe. She will forget you, your timeline, her entire mission. The tether will dissolve, and you will simply fade from her reality. It is the only way to deactivate the beacon. The proposal was a different kind of violence. It wasn't the surgical removal of a memory. It was the annihilation of Alara's courage, her defiance, her very reason for being here. It was to make her the sacrifice, to lobotomize the savior. The thought was more abhorrent than the idea of his own destruction. "No," Leo said, the word flat and absolute. "You won't touch her. It is not your choice to make." Alistair's voice rose, echoing through the chamber. "This is not about your sentimental attachment. This is about the structural integrity of causality." "You keep talking about structure and integrity," Leo shot back, his own voice rising to meet the others, the Restorer in him finally snapping. "But all I see are cracks, and all you want to do is plaster over them. You tried to erase my memory. Now you want to erase hers. You're not fixing anything. You're just hiding the damage." He turned his back on Alistair, his eyes locked on Alara's suspended form. The golden thread he had seen in the chamber was invisible now, but he could feel it, a taut live wire humming between their two hearts. He had spent his life understanding that true restoration wasn't about making something look new. It was about honoring the break, integrating the history of the damage into a new, stronger whole. These timekeepers, with all their power, understood nothing about repair. They only understood deletion. "There has to be another way," Leo said, more to himself than to Alistair. "A way to use the tether. Not as a beacon, but as a weapon. You said the rogue is trying to synchronize with my timeline. What if we didn't wait for him? What if we pulled him into ours?" Alistair stared at him aghast. "That is insanity. To deliberately attract a temporal rogue, to give him a stable anchor point. It would be an invitation for annihilation, or a trap," Leo countered, his mind, so used to working with fragile, precious things, now designing a snare. "He's hunting me because of my connection to her. He wants to sever it. So we let him think he can. We use the tether as the lure. But the moment he tries to cut it, the moment he fully manifests," he left the sentence hanging, the implication clear. "They would be ready." The air in the Chronos Club seemed to grow heavy, the shifting tapestries on the walls flickering faster, showing brief, terrifying glimpses of a city being unmade stone towers dissolving into sand, rivers running backwards, people flickering like faulty projections. The rogue was close. The decision couldn't be waited on. Alistair was silent for a long moment. his eyes darting between Leo's determined face and the worsening visions on the walls. He was a man of procedure, of order. What Leo was proposing was chaos, a gamble with reality itself. The council would never authorize it, he whispered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. The council isn't here, Leo said, his voice low and intense. You are, and she is. He pointed to Alara. You said she believed in this. She believed I was worth the risk. Are you going to honor her choice, or are you going to erase it? The question hung between them, the fate of a city, a timeline, and two souls balanced on its edge. Alistair closed his eyes, as if listening to a distant fading song. When he opened them, a grim, resigned resolve had settled in their depths. He gave a single, sharp nod. We would have to do it here, in the heart of the club. The energy required. It'll be like setting a fire in a library. There will be collateral damage. There is no guarantee we will survive the encounter. Leo didn't flinch. He looked at Ilara, at the woman who had kissed him to save a future she believed in. He thought of the taste of her, the storm in her eyes, the terrible, beautiful mistake that was now his only purpose. He was no longer a restorer of books. He was a restorer of choices, of futures. Then we make it count, Leo said, his voice steady as the world began to flicker and die around them. Tell me what to do. The air in the Chronos Club began to curdle. The gentle golden pulsation of the orrery stuttered into a frantic strobing red. The tapestries of history were no longer shimmering. They were screaming. A medieval battlefield bled into a 1920s jazz club, the sounds of clashing steel and frantic trumpets merging into a single, dissonant roar. The floor beneath their feet lost its solidity, becoming for a moment the deck of a wooden ship on a churning sea, then the cracked asphalt of a modern highway. He's here, Alistair whispered, his face ashen. He's tearing through the buffers. He's using the tether's resonance as a battering ram. Leo stood his ground, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He focused on the invisible thread connecting him to Alara, not as a fragile thing to be protected, but as a tripwire. A lure. Now, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Do it now. Alistair's hands flew across a console of light that materialized from the air. His movements were swift, precise, but his fingers trembled. I'm concentrating the paradox's energy, focusing it into a single point. It will be like lighting a signal fire in the heart of a storm. He won't be able to resist. A low thrumming built in the center of the chamber, a sound that was less a noise and more a pressure wave that made Leo's teeth ache. The air itself began to warp, twisting around a point directly between him and Ilara's stasis sphere. The golden thread he had felt became visible again, not as a gentle light, but as a searing, white-hot line of pure energy, vibrating with a terrifying pent-up power. It was the physical manifestation of their kiss, of her choice, of his defiance. It was the most beautiful and dangerous thing he had ever seen. And then, he came. There was no door opening, no flash of light. One moment the space at the end of the golden thread was empty. The next he was just there, the temporal rogue. He was not a monster from a nightmare. He was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in a suit that seemed to be woven from static and shadow. His face was ordinary, almost bland, but his eyes were voids. They were not black. They were the absence of everything. Windows into a place where time had been scoured away, leaving only a hungry, infinite nothing. His gaze fell upon Leo, and it was like being doused in liquid nitrogen. It was a look that didn't see a person, but an equation, a problem to be solved. The anchor, the rogue said, his voice a dry rustle, like pages tearing in an empty library. The fixed point, you are the knot. I have come to untie you. He raised a hand and the shadows around it coalesced into a blade of pure negation, a shard of non-time that drank the light from the air around it. He moved toward the glowing tether, his intent clear. One cut. That was all it would take. Now, Alistair, Leo yelled, but his voice was lost in the screaming vortex of the unraveling chamber. The rogue brought the blade down, and Ilara's eyes snapped open. It was not a slow awakening, it was a jolt of pure consciousness, a surge of will that shattered the stasis sphere from the inside. Shards of crystalline energy exploded outward, and she stepped through the falling debris, her gray shift replaced by the phantom echo of her emerald dress. Her face was not that of a lost soul, but of a warrior. She had heard the call of the tether, felt the imminent severance, and she had answered. Her hand shot out, not to block the shadow blade, but to intercept it. She didn't grab the weapon. She grabbed the rogue's wrist. The moment she made contact, the entire Chronos Club froze. The screaming histories on the walls stalled. The strobing red light hung motionless in the air. The rogue was immobilized, his void-like eyes wide with a shock that was utterly, profoundly human. He was not looking at a fellow timekeeper. He was looking at a ghost, Ilara. The name was a choked whisper, a sound of shattered bedrock. It can't be. You were lost. You fell into the schism. Ilara's voice, when she spoke, was steady, layered with an ancient, bottomless grief. I did not fall. Cyrus, I was pushed. The name hung in the frozen air. Cyrus the rogue had a name. Leo could only watch, his breath caught in his throat, the world holding its breath with him. This was the truth. This was the heart of the storm. You were my mentor, Ilara continued, her grip on his wrist like iron, her words not angry, but devastatingly sad. You taught me everything, and when I discovered you were the one deliberately creating temporal faults, when I realized you were the rogue the council feared, you tried to erase me. You cast me into a place outside of time, thinking it would be a void, but it wasn't. Cyrus stared, his weapon forgotten, his entire being consumed by a dawning, horrific realization. It was a cradle, Ilara said, her eyes locking with his, and in their depths, Leo could see the storm she had carried with her all along. A cradle of pure potential. And I saw it all. Cyrus, I saw your plan. To collapse the timeline back to a single, controllable point. To become the god of a static, sterile universe. And I saw the one fixed point, the one restorer, whose unbroken spirit was the key you needed to turn the lock. Her gaze shifted from Cyrus to Leo, and the tempest in her eyes softened into a look of such profound, unwavering certainty that it stole the air from his lungs. I didn't find him by accident in that library, she said, her voice softening, meant only for Leo now. I fought my way through the chaos you created, Cyrus, to get to him. The kiss wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration of war. It was me choosing a future of beautiful, messy, unpredictable life over your dead, perfect eternity. The truth was a physical wave that washed over Leo, cleansing the last vestiges of doubt. He wasn't a victim. He wasn't just a fixed point. He was a symbol, a standard to be rallied around. Her kiss had been the first shot. Cyrus let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, incandescent rage. The frozen moment shattered. He wrenched his hand back, the shadow blade dissolving. The Chronos Club erupted back into chaotic motion, but the fight had changed. It was no longer about severing a tether. It was a battle of ideologies, of love against control, of life against stillness. You cannot win, Cyrus snarled, his void-like eyes burning with a cold fire. The paradox you created is already eating this timeline alive. He gestured wildly, and a section of the wall tore open, not into another time, but into a howling, grey nothingness. The schism, the wind that tore from it was the wind of oblivion, and it began to pull everything in the chamber toward it. Books from the non-existent shelves, fragments of the shattered stasis sphere, the very light from the air, all was sucked into the hungry maw. Alistair cried out, grabbing onto a solid section of console as his feet slid across the floor. Ilara braced herself, her emerald dress whipping in the gale, her hand still outstretched toward Leo, the golden tether between them strained, flickering against the pull of the void. Leo felt his own body being dragged forward, his shoes skidding on the now insubstantial floor. He locked eyes with Ilara across the maelstrom. He saw the fear in them, but also the fierce, unbreakable hope. She had crossed time to save a future she believed in. He would not let it end here. He was a restorer, and he knew what to do with the break. Instead of fighting the pull, he leaned into it. He took one step, then another, not away from the schism but toward Ilara. The tether glowed brighter with each step, the energy of their connection flaring against the consuming gray. He wasn't trying to escape the void. He was using its power, channeling it through the one thing Cyrus could not understand, the one thing his dead universe had no place for. He reached for her hand. Their fingers brushed, then clasped, and in that touch, the kiss was completed. The desperate, mistaken kiss in the rain became a chosen, defiant union in the heart of oblivion. The golden tether didn't just glow, it detonated. A wave of pure golden light erupted from their joined hands, a silent, expanding sphere of warmth and certainty. It didn't fight the grey nothingness, it healed it. Where the light touched, the schism sealed, the screaming tapestries stilled into coherent, beautiful images, the frantic orrery slowed to its steady, graceful dance. The light washed over Cyrus. He did not scream, he simply faded. The static of his suit dissolved, the void in his eyes filled with a fleeting final glimpse of the vibrant, chaotic, beautiful world he had tried to destroy. Then he was gone. The silence that returned was not the silence of absence but of peace. The Chronos Club was restored, the air still and warm once more. The only evidence of the battle was the shattered stasis sphere and the profound, ringing quiet. Leo and Ilara stood hand in hand, the golden tether now a soft, permanent glow around their clasped fingers. The emergency was over. The trap had sprung. The truth was out. But as the adrenaline faded, a new quiet reality began to dawn. They had survived, they had won. But what came next? He was a man from a simple, linear world. She was an archivist of all time, her home a place outside of it. They had saved each other's lives, but they existed in different dimensions of reality. The battle was over. The far more complicated question of their future was just beginning. The golden light faded, not with a flicker, but by slowly sinking into the very walls of the Chronos Club, leaving behind a deep, resonant peace. The air, once charged with the scream of unraveling history, now felt like the quiet hush of a library at dawn. The tapestries on the walls no longer bled and shifted. They glowed with a steady, gentle luminescence, showing scenes of quiet continuity, a farmer tending a field across centuries, a river flowing to the sea under a million different skies. The storm was over. Leo became aware of two things at once: the warm, solid pressure of Ilara's hand in his, and the profound silence. He turned to her. The warrior's fire in her eyes had banked, replaced by a quiet, weary wonder. She was looking at their joined hands, at the faint, golden aura that still clung to their skin, a permanent reminder of the tether that had saved everything. "It's done," she whispered, the words not a question, but a soft exhalation of a burden she had carried for longer than he could possibly imagine. Alistair slowly picked himself up from where he had braced against the console. He looked older, the lines on his face etched deeper by the cosmic strain. He looked at the space where Cyrus had been, his expression not of triumph, but of a profound, sorrowful understanding. Then his gaze settled on their joined hands. He gave a slow, solemn nod. It was not an approval from the council. It was something more personal, a recognition. "The paradox," Alistair began, his voice rough, "is no longer a paradox," Ilara finished for him, her eyes still on Leo. "It's a foundation." And in that moment, Leo understood the true nature of his restoration. He hadn't just mended a break in time, he had helped integrate it. The mistake was now a fundamental part of the structure, a golden thread of choice and love woven into the immutable tapestry of cause and effect. It was stronger for having been broken. Alistair gestured, and a section of the wall shimmered, resolving into a familiar image, the old city library, quiet and still, the storm now just a memory on its rain-streaked windows. Leo's desk was exactly as he had left it, the book he had been restoring still open, waiting. "Your timeline is stable," Alistair said. "The cracks have been sealed. You can return." The words should have been a relief. They were the return to normalcy, to the quiet, ordered life he had always known. But the man who had stepped into the Chronos Club was not the same man who would be stepping out. He had been a restorer of objects. Now he was the guardian of a truth that spanned eternity. He looked at Ilara. The unspoken question hung in the air between them, more terrifying than any temporal rogue. What were they now? She was an archivist, her duty to witness all of time. He was a fixed point, rooted in a single, linear life. They existed in different dimensions of reality, their love story a beautiful, impossible anomaly. Ilara smiled, a soft, sad curve of her lips. She gently squeezed his hand. "The tether isn't a chain, Leo, it's a bridge." She let go of his hand and walked toward the image of the library, but she didn't step through. Instead, she reached out and touched the image, and the scene shifted. It was no longer a static picture, it was a living window. He saw himself, days from now, walking through the park, and he felt a faint, warm pulse in the golden thread around his finger. He saw himself, years from now, gray at the temples, carefully restoring a medieval manuscript, and he felt the same gentle pulse, a constant, reassuring presence. She would not be at his side in the conventional sense. She would be in the quiet moments, in the turning of a page, in the scent of rain on the wind. She would be his guardian archivist, and he her anchor to the beautiful, fleeting, precious present. "I have to go back to my duties," she said softly. "The timelines need tending. But I will never be far." A bridge works both ways. It was not the ending he had secretly dreamed of in the heart of the storm. There would be no shared home, no growing old together in the traditional sense, but it was something deeper, more eternal. Their love was not confined to a single lifetime. It was a permanent feature of the universe, a note in the grand symphony of time itself. He knotted his throat too tight for words. He stepped toward the portal, feeling the familiar, solid world waiting for him. He paused on the threshold and looked back at her one last time. She stood in the center of the golden chamber, not a lost soul or a warrior, but simply Ilara, a woman who had loved time in all its forms enough to fight for its right to be messy and free. He stepped through. The air in the library was cool and smelled of paper and polish. The storm had passed, and a sliver of moonlight fell across his desk. Everything was exactly as it was, and yet, everything was different. He looked down at his hand. The golden glow was gone, but he could still feel the echo of it, a warm humming certainty just beneath his skin. He picked up the book he had been restoring, his fingers tracing the delicate spine. He wasn't just fixing it anymore. He was honoring its history, its journey through time. He was, in his own small way, being an archivist too. He never saw Ilara again in the flesh. But sometimes, when the light fell through the library windows at a certain angle, casting long, golden shadows, he would feel a presence. Sometimes, in the heart of a silent winter afternoon, he would catch the faint, floral scent of her and he would smile. The world went on, beautifully, chaotically, predictably and miraculously, and Leo Older, the restorer, lived his life, mending broken things, great and small. He lived it fully, completely, loved by a woman who watched over his timeline from a room outside of time. Their love a silent, golden thread woven into the heart of all that is and all that ever will be. A testament to the truth that the most universal turning events are not always explosions and battles. Sometimes, they begin with a single, desperate kiss in the rain, a mistake that became a choice, a rupture that became a foundation, a moment that was made to last forever.